Ambition. That is the main word that should describe you if you have clicked onto this video. That is the core word that describes the people who I will be talking to. Regardless of your motivations as to why that's the case, regardless of who you are and what you want to achieve, you've been told that you cannot develop yourself to become a so-called jack of all trades, that to become proficient, to gain mastery in any certain field, you need to focus simply on that field because you are not good enough to do more. That is the underlying assumption. Labels like the polymath historically, people who became experts in various fields, the word is just a cover. It's not foundational to who they are. The reality is that they were people who developed themselves, and their expertise in different fields were simply a reflection of that. But polymaths don't exist today, not anymore. And if you want to understand why that's the case, I have a separate video dedicated exactly to that. But for now, I want to use this video to talk about the core mechanisms that you can use to improve every aspect of your life and to gain mastery in multiple fields. Think of it this way, okay? You are essentially the games console. So you are the thing in which you play all the games. So there may be multiple games. For each of you watching this, you all have different interests. You are different people. Music, sports, mathematics, physics, whatever it may be. The purpose of this video is going to be to teach you the absolute basics of how to upgrade that console itself. You are going to be able to play the same games better on a PS5 than you would on a PS4, and you are going to be able to play new games. In a single YouTube video, I'm not going to tell you how to get a shredded six-pack or increase your IQ, because these are all things that people know how to do. This is readily available, easy to access information. The real benefit that I can provide you here is going to be to point you into the right direction, to then apply that later informational step. Every one of you has gone through the education system or is currently going through it. And at some point during your education, while you're at school or university, you were taught something that you essentially thought, this is kind of pointless for me to learn. This thing doesn't really help me. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, you were right. However, the thing that a lot of people do wrong at this point is that because so much of what they learned was actually useless to them at that point, they kind of reject everything wholesale. And by the way, even if you are still at university, this still applies to you. So this is clearly the case with people who left academia because they did not want to be inside the school system anymore. But even with people who are still in academia, instead what we do is that we've just ignored everything else except for one narrow thing. So if you're doing a mathematics degree like I am, then you just look at mathematics and physics. But I've ignored everything else that I didn't like at some point during school. However, my entire point in this video, there are some extremely powerful tools that you may learn in academia that you have neglected because academia is so bloated with so many useless things. The academics and professors are dealing with some very powerful knowledge, but they never apply it to anything useful. And the people that try and do useful things rarely know enough about the things that the academics are talking about. It's when these two come together that you get the most powerful kind of person. This will look like someone who does a maths degree, but they look around, they think every so often, this is really useful and important information that I could apply to so many things, but everyone around me is a bunch of nerds and they're going to stay in academia for the rest of their lives. Let me leave academia, go into a bank and revolutionize finance forever. Okay, what are the actual steps? I'm going to give a brief overview of all the core pillars that I can discuss in this video and the things that I've developed for myself in the last couple years. One is physical health, the absolute baseline of everything else that you do. Whether you like it or not, we exist as physical animals. Going back to the operating system analogy, you need a solid baseline to be able to do anything. If you're trying to make money as a professional or get better grades as a student, but you're sleep deprived and you've just ate a bucket of KFC, then you should not be surprised if that is such a difficult thing to do. It is the equivalent of trying to run GTA 6 on a PS2. Of course, you're not going to fucking do it. Like I said, this video is intended to be holistic, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about the specifics of each of these, but I'm going to give you a few core basics of fundamental health principles that you can look into more detail in by yourself. Strength training, cardio, sleep, not enough people talk about this one, diet, and cognitive training. Don't complicate that last one too much. What this will look like is, for example, in the later parts of the day when your brain kind of slows down, it will be something like reflection. And in earlier parts of the day when your mind is the sharpest and you're producing fast output, it will be something like literal training in that sense. So for me, I like to play chess and do maths problem sheets, but that's because I'm a math student. Maybe you don't enjoy that. It doesn't need to be complicated. This is the point. It can be as simple as planning what you're going to do for that day. That is a form of cognitive training. You already kind of do this. Just deciding what you're going to wear that day is a form of cognitive training. But it's like going to the gym. Like, yeah, walking on the treadmill for 5 minutes is a form of training. But there are different things that you can do to train, some of which are just objectively more effective than others. If you want more specific examples about this kind of thing in particular, just subscribe to the channel so you can see when I release those videos and go through my older videos where I talk about some of the things already. Number 2 is meta-awareness. It is going to be very easy for you to feel like you're just floating or drifting through life, not really achieving or doing anything if you're not actually solidly analyzing that claim. You're essentially just using your hunch as to what you're doing and when, and you never have some objective metric to measure this by. A really simple beginner's way to improve meta-awareness is, like I mentioned earlier, to do reflections and actually writing those reflections down. So this can look like something resembling journaling, but journaling is quite vague. It can mean many different things. For me personally, the way I do this is, again, at the end of the day or at the start of the day, I will write down some kind of entry and I will split it into 2 categories: thoughts and actions. And this is actually pretty interesting and fun. You can learn things out about yourself, etc. It really doesn't need to be difficult. The thoughts section of every entry will literally just include you sitting there with no kind of stimulation. So you can't do this while listening to music or watching a video or something like that. You literally just sit there for 5 minutes and you write down exactly what you are thinking about in that present moment. Something will come to mind. Trust me, you think that nothing will, something will fucking come to mind. No matter what that thing is, by the way, you write it down. This level of meta-awareness actually uncovers things that you didn't even know were significant. If something is in your mind, you write it down. That should be your golden rule. And then the purpose of the action section is for you to immediately take action on the things you are thinking about. And I'll explain why. Because if you're thinking about something and there is nothing you can do to take action on it immediately, then it's not worth thinking about. However, if there is something that you are thinking about that you can take action upon, then having it there as a literal physical reminder will make it far more formal and structured and easier to follow. Number 3 is drawing off of sources of knowledge. It is true that today knowledge is cheaper than ever. Everything you can essentially need to know about is somewhere on the internet for you to find. However, it's also true that knowledge is far more bloated than ever. This comes back to the thing about school, for example. In school, there's a bunch of stuff. A lot of it actually is very useful if the person who needs it knows where to look for it and when. The problem is that right now you do not know how to look for it and when. And there's a really simple way to fix this very quickly, and that is to do things the more natural way anyway. So what I mean by that is, in school, essentially, this is how you learn. This is how you've been conditioned to learn, even if you're not in school anymore. You have some book full of theory, full of knowledge, a lot of it probably very useful, but not to you because you don't understand why you're learning it at this point. So you have this, you read the entire book, and then you are given some kind of scenarios, and some of the things that you read in the book, you can start to connect the dots to, and some of it starts to become, oh yeah, now it's relevant, now it's relevant, now it's relevant. This is not how things develop in the real world. Even the people who wrote those books developed the books as such. They developed the knowledge as such. They have some real physical constraint or problem that they're trying to solve. So in physics, for example, there's some system they're trying to describe, so they learn and understand the necessary amount of mathematics, for example, to describe that system. For you, in a practical sense, this could look like you have an interest in something. Let's say you want to get better at producing music. You start with that foundational interest. You do not start with this large knowledge of theory that people think you need before you can actually start doing something, because you've essentially been like psyoped by school systems into thinking that you need the teacher's approval before you can start doing things. That's a tangent. The point is, you start with the interest and then you actually try and do things within that as soon as possible. So in the music analogy, that means you start producing music as soon as possible. When you start to do something practically as soon as possible, what happens is that it becomes immediately very obvious what the things that you need to learn actually are. At this point, you can then go back and do the necessary learning of the theory or knowledge that you needed to. So you try making beats, and the beats sound really terrible because they're not like syncing together. So you learn a bit about music theory and how like there's different beat patterns and things like this. Okay, this video is getting kind of long, so subscribe to stay tuned for the rest of my videos, where I'm going to go into detail about each of the things I spoke about today, as well as many other things that cross my mind. If you've already subscribed, then make sure to like this video so that more people can see it. We reach more like-minded people, the discourse grows, and everyone benefits. That's all I have to say for now. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.